Kevin Durant takes to Twitter to talk about leadership, engage with fans, and give a little more insight into what it means to be a superstar in the NBA. It's refreshing, even though it rubs some people the wrong way. Going to talk about this, what Durant means to the team, and like I said, what it means to leadership. Going to share a travel story as well. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, back from a little jaunt down south, which I'll get to a little bit later. Thanks for making Locked On Nets your first listen to the free and available on all platforms, YouTube as well. So make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or over on YouTube, and let you know that Locked On today's episode is brought to you by Arcade One Up. Locked On is partnering with Arcade One Up to give away 3 free NBA Jam Shack machines. Stay tuned for later in the show to learn how to enter. All right, solo podcast here, Adam Armbrecht and I, as we roll through the summer, have been kind of trading it off here every once in a while when the schedule fits. I'll get into a little bit later why I was a day late on this podcast. Pretty, I would say, epic travel, terrible travel story. We'll get to that later in the podcast. Hope you think it's worth it. I certainly was hoping in the moment that it would be a good story. Still evaluating about whether that's the case or not. But wanted to talk today about some interactions Kevin Durant had the other day on Twitter. I'll give KD credit. I mean, we've always given KD credit really across the board when it comes to what he does on the basketball court and really off of it as well. But I'll say that Durant, among all of his talents, he does have a talent for social media as well. And it's different than a lot of what you see in the current NBA landscape, where a lot of players just have, a curated kind of feed. They have a curated kind of just approach to how they interact with the media. I think that's generally a good idea to just, sort of kind of craft what it is you want to say, what you want to put out there, what you want to put your name with. And I do think Durant does that. But there are times where he for sure takes to social media and wants to get a certain point across, or wants to interact, or wants to just kind of mix it up, specifically with people that want to, deride him a little bit or want to take umbrage with certain things that he's done in his career. And that definitely happened a couple of days ago over on Twitter, and it's always funny to see it happen because he goes through these sort of spurts where nothing really happens for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like everything's happening for him and he's responding to everything, and it's all out there, and it's usually pretty funny, usually pretty spot on. Sometimes it can be I think some people, depending on how you feel about Durant, would think that it could be a little off-putting. It's hard to argue that he's coming from a place of at least sincerity, right? I think that he's always been pretty sincere, honest guy up front. Doesn't seem, I think he cares probably what people think, but that's just a human kind of thing. But I wanted to go through a couple of, I thought, pretty telling responses that he had to some, I'm just going to put it random people. I'm not going to throw out all the different folks that interacted with KD on Twitter because whatever. But I did think that a few of his responses are worth sort of like diving into about what it means to be a leader, what it means in the current NBA about sort of leading your team. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about some stats when it comes to Durant that aren't things that kind of come up all the time that I think, points, assists, rebounds, those are the things, true, even like if we get into analytics, the true shooting percentage, those are the things that typically tend to come up with Kevin Durant. But there's a few pieces statistics that I found pretty interesting when diving in to things that translate, I think, into like the leadership aspect more than just being the best player on the Nets, which we clearly know Kevin Durant is. Like, obviously, Kevin Durant's the best player in the Nets. Kevin Durant is a top 4 player in basketball. You want to think his star, fell a little bit in this offseason. It's hard to really make huge cases against it, I think. I mean, I know that they got bounced in the first round and great players are supposed to make it a little further. I don't want to be one of the people that bets against Kevin Durant at this point. I feel like that in general is not a good like sort of life and basketball strategy to bet against Kevin Durant. But a few of the comments that he made, which I find to be interesting, is, well, the first one is about leadership. And so when we look, Adam and I have talked about this before, the idea of leadership in basketball and like what it means to be a leader and like whether Kevin Durant is a leader. And we've always contended that Kevin Durant's sort of like in a lot of ways the consummate leader because he praises players when when he feels they do the right thing. He will get on guys that when, it doesn't go right, but it's really never from a point of like maliciousness or selfishness. It's usually, in an effort to make someone better. And we've always really respected that beyond just the play on the court. So one Twitter fella, man, I'm not sure who this person is, was talking about leadership, and they said leader is just stuff analysts assign to any player they like. When you play team sports and you have coaches and assistant coaches, they lead the team. And Kevin Durant says, thanks for knowing you. And he, throws a little curse at the end, which we don't want to do here on Locked On, but you can pretty much figure it out. And I thought this was interesting because this was Durant, and this was a little bit of a theme of what he was talking about on Twitter, but this is Durant kind of saying that the media has crafted ideas around leadership that don't necessarily jive like with what it actually is on the basketball court. And I think this is probably correct because, look, are we media here? Yeah, I think probably a little bit, but not in a conventional way. We kind of just want to talk about the team and cover the Nets and just kind of have fun with it. But there is a certain piece of the media that will angle shoot for stories around like non-concrete things. Leadership is one of these non-concrete things. Clutch is often like a non-concrete thing that you hear people throw out there as evidence that they've crafted around whether a player is deserving of certain accolades or not. Here, Durant is talking, though, about how this stuff is, kind of made up, right? That coaches are there to lead, assistant coaches are there to like lead the team, players are there to sort of perform based on expectation, and and that's kind of the long and the short of it. And I think I do agree with that in general. And I get the sense that Durant isn't like speaking kind of out of his butt on this one either. We've seen multiple examples of Durant over the last couple of years really defer, right? Defer to Nash, defer to the organization, not really make it about himself, like kind of just seemingly have trust in what the organization is trying to do on both a high level and on a basketball level. Whether that's right or wrong is, neither here, there, or indifferent, but it does show that he kind of views himself as, I don't want to say it's a cog in the machine, but it's an important piece of the overall puzzle where everyone fits a role. And then when you try to talk about leadership in a certain way, it's mostly just a media crafted narrative. And I find that really interesting to think about Durant sort of thinking about his time on the basketball court like this. And it kind of bleeds into narratives as well, because this is clearly something Durant has kind of fought back against over the last couple of years. It's just like the overall narrative around his career. Because another commenter that he responded to, the comment says, at this point in your career, do you even care about the narrative? I feel like you've kind of embraced being the bad guy and enjoy it now. I thought Durant's response to this was interesting. He said, I'm kind of jaded with all this. I thought your play on the court dictates the narrative, but I didn't realize that you have to sell your play to the media as well as your personality for a narrative to really hit. And I think he really sums up what's happening a lot of times around the basketball ecosystem, like around the basketball, sort of the industry of talking about basketball, is that it's become less about even what happens on the court and more about how you're viewed when it comes to the media. And it's clear that this is something that really bothers Durant, because I think he views himself, and I think rightfully so, as sort of a consummate leader, a guy who doesn't want to, throw teammates under the bus, that doesn't want to start trouble, that doesn't want to mix it up really, that just wants to be, as he said, go out and hoop, and like that's pretty much it. And he's really kind of always done that. And you can see a frustration coming through with him where even in these responses, and I get that it's social media, even in these responses where he's saying, hey, I didn't realize I needed to do other things besides be good at basketball and just like be a good teammate to make the leadership thing happen. I want to talk more about what Durant was kind of getting into here, more about what it means kind of to be a leader. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. your friends at Built Bar are always coming out with amazing new flavors. Well, this time Built has truly outdone themselves with a new mud pie flavor just in time for the first time ever. Built is introducing the mud pie flavor in both the bar and the puff. Not sure what it tastes like, but if you're a chocolate fan, you might not be sure what it tastes like. I know what it tastes like. If you're a chocolate fan, you got to sit down for this. The mud pie bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse smothered in 100% real chocolate and topped with cookies and cream crumble. It's the perfect snack to carry you through the summer, especially if you're trying to stay healthy. Got the stats to back it up. Just 150 calories, 8 grams of sugar, like I said, covered in 100% real chocolate, healthy and tasty. You go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, wanted to talk a little bit more here about leadership, Kevin Durant, some more of his responses on Twitter. Throw out a couple stats here that I think will help to sort of like solidify this idea around why, leadership goes beyond just, well, one, what the media wants to kind of craft around you. And then the ideas of the things that maybe someone's not going to throw out there about themselves, but then there's certain stats that kind of just jump out to you and make it so that's like kind of, there's no debate around whether this guy is a leader or whether we already know he's among the best players in the game. But when this idea around leadership comes up, it becomes this, disproving a false negative, like not saying someone's not a leader or someone saying they can't lead the team. It's so hard to disprove, right? Like outside of very, very specific circumstances. So Durant, like I said, Durant did go, he does like to clap back on people, asking people like, oh, that, if they know his mindset and approach so well, like, why don't they tell him what it is? It reminds people that he doesn't think he struggles with anything as a basketball player. And then, that's kind of what it is. He talks a little bit about double teams and then saying that, when he passes out of a double team, it's the other player's sort of, responsibility to make that person pay. And I think that's all true. Like, I don't think anyone would really contend with any of that stuff. I don't think anyone would say those things are wrong. And I think that Durant does in that way a really good job of sort of synthesizing these ideas around, hey, I know it's going to be hard to contextualize sort of what I'm doing on the basketball court beyond the stats, but these are things that, again, most of it's narrative driven. Most of it's just who the media wants to like that day or who the media wants to dislike. Nets folks have been through this stuff time and time again. And we kind of all know how it lays out at this point. I did want to go through a couple stats that I found to be interesting beyond just, the stuff that we already know about Kevin Durant, the points, the true shooting, the effective field goal percentage, the stuff that we know he's among the most elite players in the game. I was going through some of the NBA stat stuff and was going through like what NBA kind of defines as hustle stats. And there's a bunch of these. Hustle stats are things that might not end up, or usually do not end up showing up in the box score, but can signify that a player is doing things outside of the realm of how basketball is typically scored. Again, the aforementioned points, assists, rebounds, sort of things that we can, effectively touch when it comes to looking at what a player does. We can look at a box score and see that, okay, hey, this player did these things in a game, but we also know that sometimes those things can be a little empty. Those things don't always necessarily equate to winning. Not all points scored are points scored equally, right? Not all rebounds are created equally. Not all assists are created equally. These things can kind of be massaged by certain players over the years to make it appear as if something way better than the reality is actually happening for the player. So went over to hustle stats and took a look at like what, some of these are. And just to give a quick breakdown of these hustle stats, these are like screen assists, as Rudy Gobert, like an all-time great at that. Screen assist, points that are created off of deflections is another one. Are you creating deflections on defense? Loose balls recovered is one. Are you getting out there and trying to, going after a ball that's a 50-50 ball? Are you getting on the ground and trying to, make a play for your team? These are things that are not recorded in the traditional box score. And so, trying to go through this stuff and say, where does Kevin Durant land? And I thought there was some interesting things that stood out in terms of where KD kind of landed in terms of some of these stats. One was, and I thought this was fascinating, contested 3-point shots. So how often a player is getting out and contesting around the perimeter, closing out, finding his man, making sure that three-pointer is just not a clean look. Durant ranks sixth in the league overall this season in contested three-point shots. Only players ahead of him: Andrew Wiggins, Darius Bazley, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from the Thunder, Pascal Siakam from the Raptors, Christian Wood. Kind of surprised to see him out there. I think that part of that was scheme. And then Kevin Durant. Behind him, guys like Miles Bridges and Drew Holiday. So this is interesting. This is like, we already know Kevin Durant's a great defender. We already know that the Nets don't want to rely on him always as being their best lockdown defender because he has such a load to carry on offense. But I do find that the contested threes as a stat for where Durant lands is really interesting, just considering something that lives beyond the box score, something that maybe you don't see happen all the time. And maybe it just, his length and his overall athleticism allows him to just do this better. Cause the guys on this list tend to be pretty long dudes, right? They're able to contest a little more easily, maybe just because their overall length allows them to. Not all the time for this list, but in general. But I guess I was a little surprised to see him on there because I don't know, this is just not what you think of when you think of Kevin Durant as a player. You don't necessarily think of him as making those plays. We know he does, as part of just the overall, top down look of him as an NBA player, but it wouldn't be the first 10 things you thought of when you thought of Kevin Durant for sure, right? You wouldn't think, oh yeah, just the way he's closing out on 3-pointers. That's just not what you think because you have so many other great things to think about when it comes to him as a player. There's another one, and I mentioned it before, just loose balls recovered. He is in the top 20 in the league in this stat. He had 0.8 loose balls recovered on the season. Guys at the top of this list are guys you think of as really great defenders, by the way. Jimmy Butler's up there, Pascal Siakam, Robert Williams is up there. These guys are all more than one a game. Embiid is there. Then there's just other kind of superstar types. John Morant's up here, Steph Curry's up there, and Durant at 0.8 does sit right around the top 20 in this stat, which I thought was just another one. It's you don't, when we talk about the Nets and you think about them, putting the hard hats on and getting down and doing the nitty gritty stuff that Blake Griffin sort of made quasi famous for the team. Those are the guys you kind of think of doing that. Now, some of that ends up being just the time on the court. You can go for more loose balls if you play more. That kind of makes sense. It's somewhat 1-to-1 on minutes. Not always though, right? Because there's guys that play a lot of minutes here that didn't really end up showing up on the list. I need to say James Harden does not show up on this list. James Harden plays a ton of minutes. He's nowhere close to this loose ball recovered, any of these hustle stats. And that sometimes that fits with what we know about a player too. It fits the context of kind of how we view a player on the court in terms of whether they're, I don't want to say giving it their all, but I don't know, that kind of feels like giving it their all. Because if you're doing things in the box score that ring in on the general narrative side, like points, but you're also doing the things that kind of ring in as the 50-50 pieces or the things that are going to go unsung. No one's counting these things as part of the general overall NBA landscape. I think that says a lot about a player to know that they're also doing these things because you are not going to be heralded for these pieces. You're not going to be heralded for these stats. They're not going to come up on, some of these talk shows that are going to talk about players. These are not going to be highlights either. Just in the general, when we're looking at highlights of a game, there's 500 things that can happen in a game that typically aren't going to be closeouts and loose balls. And NBA players know this. They know that those aren't going to be the plays that show up on highlight reels, but they also know those are the plays that are going to end up helping you win a game. And I think the best players in the game really, really understand that. The champions kind of do understand that. So when you see Durant showing up on this list among hustle stats, it kind of explains to you why I think there would be frustration from him about having to deal with some of these narratives that he's had to deal with over the years. Right? Can you see how that frustration would build? Hey man, I'm doing everything here. I'm doing I'm doing the nitty gritty work and doing all the things that help you win a basketball game. And to be spoken about as not a leader or not fitting a media narrative feels completely insane. So I can see why he would spend some time, getting into the Twitter streets and kind of fighting back against that. It makes, in a lot of ways, it does kind of make sense to me. Got to talk a little bit more about a Durant. Got to tell you a little quick travel story here as well. So a little bit more to get into here on a Thursday. First, told you at the beginning, Arcade 1UP wants to let you know NBA Jam is back. Arcade 1UP is the leader in at-home retro arcade games. They're not only bringing back the best game ever, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. It's one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed team. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters involved. Compete with friends and family throughout all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com for an estimated early September ship date. You got to get on that right now. They got more classics. They got Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, starting just $399. You have to check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/locked on. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/locked on. You've got till July 8th to enter to win an NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. arcade1up.com/locked on. So I think this is all to say, I fully believe that the Nets are still in very good hands with Kevin Durant. I don't think Nets fans really question that at all. I do think there's some times where fans, maybe you're out there and you're thinking why does Kevin Durant engage us on Twitter? Why does he mix it up with fans? Why does he listen to these people that are just kind of nameless people behind a keyboard? And I can kind of hear that. I also think that when you're someone that's confident in your abilities and when you believe that you're a winner and a champion like that Kevin Durant is, then I don't know, maybe you can't suffer the fools of of people that kind of come at you with misinformation, or people that don't seem to understand the full scope of the landscape, or people that just frankly maybe shouldn't have their opinions be voiced as loudly as other people. And I know that's a slippery slope to be on because we're here talking basketball every single day, and there can be very much the who are you to comment on it. So I totally get that, but I also understand the want to kind of defend yourself, because I don't think Kevin Durant's defending himself as much as he's questioning the rhetoric that has come up around him and just asking honest questions and saying, what are you talking about? Do you even know what you're talking about? Very often it's clear that people don't know what they're talking about, or don't care, or just are happy to get a response from a celebrity or a response from a basketball player and feel like they've won, in quotes, because I don't think anyone's really winning with this kind of thing, but feel like they've won by being able to rile up someone who, they look up to or they respect in some way, even if they have chosen other sides when it comes to stands around different basketball players. Because we all know people are like that. We know that people are like that with their teams. We know there's a tribalism around sports. There's a piece of that comes around players now too, which exists in the NBA way more than it exists in other sports, where you are a fan of the player. I mean, how many people did we see come on to the Nets side when Harden, came on board, and then just as quickly left when Harden was traded? This is just part of the NBA landscape at this point. And people just want to take guys that they feel are their rivals in terms of players. If you're a fan of Steph, you might think Kevin Durant's some kind of weird rival. I don't think Kevin Durant and Steph Curry see it that way, but there's definitely a section of fans that see it that way, that want to dig Durant for his legacy or whatever it is and get a rise out of questioning it. So I don't mind the part where Durant does step, just kind of throw it back at you and say, what are you talking about? This is leadership. This is basketball. This is the way it's supposed to work. And I just don't think that's the thing that we see happen with a lot of other players at this point. Most are fine just kind of sitting it out, and which is also fine too. You want to just sit it out, let people talk as much as they want to online about you and move on. I see that part of it as well. So this is all to say, after all this, I know this kind of thing rubs some people the wrong way. It doesn't for me. I kind of respect Durant for saying, hey, knock it off, or hey, what are you talking about? I maybe you do too, but I really appreciate that. All right, quick travel stuff here. There wasn't on the podcast for a couple of days. You might have noticed Adam held it down solo style. That's because we were going through a little bit of a travel thing, moving just for a little bit down south of the border. And so the couple things about this. I was texting Adam all throughout the day because this is almost reads like some kind of weird travel movie that comes on at the holidays that you would think this kind of stuff never really happens in real life. Sitting on the tarmac at JFK, about to take off, headed to Miami. And all of a sudden the pilot comes on and says, hey, we got to head back to the airport because we don't have enough gas. We have taken a new route. We don't have enough gas. And I'm thinking, you would think that like a plane of all things, I'm not going to say what airline it is. You would think a plane of all things would be like, you know what? Let's just top that baby off. I don't know. Let's fill it all the way up and make sure we're covered for a bunch of different stuff that can happen. I don't know. Maybe we don't just go in a straight line from point A to point B when it comes to an airplane. Maybe something was going to happen. Didn't seem like that was the plan with this one. We got to head back and grab more gas, top it off. Gas prices through the roof. I'm sure the airlines are feeling it the same way at the pump that we all are. Looking at that thing rile up. It's like, throw 50 on it. I can't go all the way. I can't go all the way to full on this baby here today. So just go 50. I'll feel better about it. It feels like that's what the airline did. Anyway, they put more gas in. We take off. Now we're flying. We're headed to Miami. We're almost to Miami. We're about to land. I actually felt like we were descending into a landing, and then whoops, headed back up into the air because now there's a little bit of a storm happening in Miami, and we're not going to be able to land. But guess what? We are not going to have enough time to land in Miami because, wait for it, the plane doesn't have enough gas. And now we have to get diverted to Fort Myers, where we end up landing because even after the old top off, even after they swung in and grabbed everyone's $5 to pony up for gas at the airport, we still didn't have enough. Now we land in Fort Myers. Problem with Fort Myers, plane breaks. Okay, now we're sitting on the tarmac, and it's like, hey, you know what? We're not going to fly this plane anymore. Not only are we out of gas, but the thing broke down too. I mean, this sounds like the story that happened to you in college or high school when you're out with your buddies on a Saturday night and you're like, we don't have enough money for gas. We can't get to the party. Like, it's a whole big mess. That's kind of like the way the airline was operating during this. So now we're sitting in Fort Myers, out of planes broken, no more planes coming. Big plan from the airport, grabbing you a bus. I'm going to ship you on a bus back over to Miami. You'll be good there. Don't really care what happens to you when you get to Miami. Like, not our problem, according to the Fort Myers people. That's going to be more of the Miami people problem. That's how they seem to view it. You get on the bus, we'll wipe our hands clear of it, and we get out of there. So I'm with the whole family. We're on a bus somehow. Somehow we're supposed to be in Mexico by dinner time. We're not even in Miami at dinner time. And it becomes a whole night thing. Finally get there, no plane, got to stay 2 extra days. Got to see a little bit of Miami South Beach. Hadn't been there before. My kid was very interested in moving there before it was all said and done. I don't think it's completely my scene. So that is some of the reason wasn't on the podcast. Finally did make it down to our intended destination. Could have just driven to Mexico from New York before it was all said and done. We just taken off in the car at the same time. Would have cost less money, even with all those gas fill-ups that the airline didn't really feel like doing. Could have just driven all the way into Mexico, but sometimes that happens with the traveling. Thankfully, Adam Armbrecht was able to hold it down. That's what partners are for. That's why he's the best in the business, folks. Doesn't complain, just steps up to the plate and says, I got this. So we are going to get on tomorrow and talk a little about Sean Marks. A bunch of stuff came out with Sean Marks over the last couple of days with people wanting to sort of take him to task over some crazily over like the D'Angelo Russell sign and trade when Durant came over with Irving. I know Irving didn't come over in the sign and trade, but that whole thing felt like that was a time to take some arrows to Marks, which felt a little bit weird. So I want to be able to discuss that. Actually, just look back at some of the moves Marks has made over the last couple of years with the understanding that like no GM is batting 1,000% at this point. And Marks, I think, has done as good a job as any in the league of building something sort of from the ground up. So it's a little bit weird to see him take a bunch of arrows, but that's the way the sports world works sometimes. All right. Be back again tomorrow talking more Nets basketball. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, free and available on every single platform out there. Adam's the one with the quotes. Always leave it to him because he's the one that comes up with these. I'll just leave it with tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.